everybody. Welcome to Church History for Chumps, Episode 2. Before we get started, I want to run you through a real quick thought experiment to kind of get you in the right headspace for this episode. I want you to imagine a movement or a religion, or let's even say a fan base, something with followers and numerous leaders and practices, but most importantly, beliefs. Now I want you to imagine that one of these leaders, a veteran believer, so if we're going with like Taylor Swift fans, for example, someone who's been down from the beginning, someone who has been listening since Teardrops on My Guitar, has been through the highs and the lows, and is all about T Swift. Now, imagine that this person is arrested and captured and forced to speak ill of Taylor Swift and her artistry, and they refuse to do so, and they are publicly burned at the stake. Now, I get that 2,000 years between our topic today, Polycarp, and where we are today can make that analogy a little different. But what I want to ask is not so much that you consider the act itself, but the response to it. I can't imagine a response to something so unjust with peace. I imagine reaction, anger, violence, sometimes even calls to insurrection or overthrow. And that's where the Christians are. You know, Polycarp was a well-respected dude. He was 86. He was a bishop, so he had status in the church. He had respect in his community. And he was arrested. He was told to recant the beliefs of Christianity or be killed. And when he didn't, he was. But the response to that wasn't violence or reaction with anger. It was actually a response that praised God that Polycarp had the courage to walk in the footsteps of Christ, because Jesus himself was also killed unjustly. And it really is more seen as a call to the church that we would hopefully have that same level of faithfulness if we were called into that same place. It is a beautiful picture of the church's posture towards martyrdom, and it's really interesting. So let's talk about it. In fact, that's what me and Tommy are about to do. Welcome to Church History for Chumps. We're glad you stopped by. Hey everybody, welcome to Church History for Chumps. My name is John Simon. I'm accompanied by the great, the tall, the wise, the Thomas Duell, and
keep it coming.
The charming, the friendly, the guy who you hope will sell you a house.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's just so much serotonin going on right now.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah, no problem.
You the plug.
Yeah. But yeah, we're so grateful that you're joining us for listening. And I know what you're thinking. John, why are you talking about a Pokémon on a church history podcast? Well, I'll tell you, Polycarp is in fact no Pokémon, but one of the church fathers and one of the most interesting tales of mythology surrounding a martyrdom that I know of personally. So we're going to talk about him.
Sweet.
And I'm pretty excited.
Heck yeah. I think it's like one of my favorite church history stories.
Yeah. I love, so when I used to go fishing with my uncle, he would always say, "Oh, I hope I catch a Polycarp," because that means mini carp. And we were always going carp fishing. So
was that the worst joke you've ever told, or is that a real thing?
I wish I could say it was both, but unfortunately it's only the first.
Oh man.
So man, but actually no, I'm going to one day be that uncle for one of my nephews or nieces, and I'll be like, "Time to catch a Polycarp." And they'll be like, "Shut up, Uncle John, get back in the boat." So Tommy, why don't you tell me a little bit about our boy Polycarp?
Yeah, Polycarp is one of the earliest church fathers after the life of Christ. He was early leader. He was the bishop of Smyrna, which I'm not exactly sure where Smyrna is.
Smyrna's in Turkey, modern day Turkey.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Is there Do you know, is there like actually is that still a city that's
It
there?
is not called Smyrna anymore. I forget what it's called now. And honestly, I can't blame them. Smyrna is kind of an ugly sounding name.
Yeah.
But yeah, Smyrna, let's see, was a Greek city on the Aegean coast of Anatolia, and it's currently Izmir in modern day Turkey. So yeah.
So he was actually a disciple of John the Apostle. So he's like truly just like second generation Christian, and he lived from AD 69 to AD 155. So he wasn't around when Jesus was walking around, but he was like shortly thereafter and was personally discipled by John the Apostle. And he's kind of seen as like one of these three primary church fathers at the very onset of the church, alongside Clement of Rome and Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius being actually not Ignatius, Irenaeus, which is another church father, was discipled by Polycarp. So all these guys are kind of interconnected at this time and functioning really as these guys were all bishops, I believe, in various cities around in Europe and the and what was considered Asia or Asia Minor.
Yeah. See, that's always exciting to me to think about, because I think that, I mean, honestly, if I had one goal for this podcast, everyone who's listening, take notes. If I had one goal for this podcast, I think it would be to recognize the lineage and the kind of the bloodline that we have as Christians, even as our traditions have kind of gone all different types of ways. Like, I think sometimes we still live and act as if the doctrine and the way that we understand the Bible was basically cooked up by our pastor Saturday night before a Sunday sermon. And it's like, no, like, we have a lineage that, I mean, it's what a lot of high church people would call apostolic succession, when we wouldn't quite recognize that in the Reformed world. But, you know, there is something that breathes all the way back to the apostles, and Polycarp being one of the key church fathers, and then also discipling Irenaeus, who was another one of them. And we can kind of just track like all these dudes, these like spiritual ancestors who have fed so much into the church. So that's just a cool thing for me. And I don't know, is John the best discipler you could ask for from the apostles?
I think so, man.
I don't think I'd want Paul.
John seems so in tune with just the relational needs of the people that he's writing to all the time. He's very fatherly. He refers to the people in his churches as his children, and yeah, he seems like a really cool guy
I think Paul would be like, he's like the dude who's always mad because he's got so much to do, and he's like, gotta write another letter to the Corinthians. Feel like I just did that. And I'm like, hey, Paul, you think we could grab a coffee this week? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, gosh dang it, man, this guy's the worst. I think John would text me in the morning with like Bible verses. Yeah.
You were loved, dear one. By the Father. Yeah.
He'd be like, hey, I was just thinking about you. Hope you're having a good day. Well, thanks, John. Gosh, such a nice guy.
Well, whatever he did with Polycarp worked, because Polycarp was authentically Christian to his core, right to the end of his days. And he actually lived like a long time, like in that age. He lived until he was 86 years old, which is super old, even in our day and age, where we've got a lot of modern medicine on our side. So he was around for quite a long time at this super early and formational time of the church, and then at the end of it all, he gets martyred, which is the story we want to tell today. And it's just such a cool ending to his story.
And I think it's worth saying too, before we jump right into the martyrdom, that he wasn't, you know, I think church figures can almost be like rappers. When they die in their prime, they tend to get like an elevated status, you know, like Tupac or, you know, lots of other rappers. But Polycarp was not like a dude who became popular because of his martyrdom. He was a bishop.
The boss, yeah.
Yeah, I've been a bishop. Like bishops are basically overseers of like large groups of churches, and he was a bishop in Smyrna, which I assume was a pretty poppin' community, and he had relationships with other very significant church figures around this time. Like you said, he was discipled by one of the apostles himself. There are various stories of his life and ministry where he's being called upon to help settle disputes that were happening in the church, or where he's just very clearly standing on right teaching. Because one of the things that I do not envy about those first few hundred years of church history is that they were just rife with heresy. Like there were so many false teaching because they hadn't figured stuff out yet. It was still super fresh to them to be like, wait a second, was that Jesus guy actually a person, or was he just like a ghost who floated around but looked like a guy? Like, that'd be hard to figure out. We've inherited 2,000 years of tradition and doctrine. Like, these dudes were still figuring that stuff out. And Polycarp was a really essential dude in helping the church do that. And so he served the church very well up until his final martyrdom.
Yeah, and we've been talking, we realized this is actually like the third week that we're honing in on something that's in some way connected to martyrdom, because even with the Desert Fathers, we were talking about how they were living at a time where for the first time in church history now, there wasn't this rampant killing of Christians going on, and so they were looking for ways to continue to hold out a faithful witness. And Polycarp's kind of on the other end of that, where he's probably the first generation of people in the first century actually weren't getting killed a whole lot for their faith. Christians, like, it was really towards the tail end of that century that things were starting to they were getting a little heat from the Roman Empire.
Yeah, each emperor kind of had their own opinion about the state religion and Christianity and how it related to that. So there were plenty of emperors who were pretty passive about Christianity because they saw it as just basically another cult. And then there were some who were very, very opposed to it. So yeah, there were seasons where it wouldn't have been that consequential to be a Christian, and then somewhere the opposite was true.
Yeah, and the first kind of generation of Christians, the main opposition you're going to have is from Jewish unbelievers. But then as Christianity started to gain some clout, that's when Rome starts paying attention, and certain emperors are starting to really kick off some persecutions.
Yeah,
which kind of brings us to that story, and most of what we know from Polycarp largely comes from this letter that was written by the church in Smyrna after he died. We know it as the Martyrdom of Polycarp, and I would highly recommend everyone to read it. It's shorter than most New Testament books in the Bible. It can be read in about 15-20 minutes. It's concise, and even the way it starts, I just really love, because I think it kind of frames the whole thing. So it starts like this: the Church of God which sojourns in Smyrna, to the Church of God which sojourns in Philomelium, and to all the sojournings of the Holy Catholic Church, meaning all churches everywhere of every time, in every place. Mercy, peace, and love of God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ be multiplied. Two things I like about that. It tells me, like, this story is for me in my church, that this church knew that this letter was going to be like perpetuated into the future. And so they were writing it for the benefit of future generations of Christians, which includes us. Yeah. And I love the language of sojourning. It's I think it's so timely right now for us to capture the reality that this is how the early church saw themselves and the world around them. Like, the idea of sojourning is that they're writing to the parallel community, the parallel kingdom that is at work in these cities. And so, like, these people were there, but they, at the end of the day, these weren't Smyrnans. They were Christians in the kingdom of God sojourning in Smyrna, as if they're a nomadic people that are permanently in Smyrna. And like, that language, I think, could teach us a lot about how to engage, like, on a national level.
It's very Ephesian too, right? Like the idea of being exiles in your land and kind of being aliens no matter where you are. Like, I think Paul was trying to kind of reinforce that same idea. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So anyway, they get right to the chase. This church is writing a letter about their pastor basically dying. And so imagine being in that boat to start with. Like, your pastor gets killed for his faith, and now you as a church are writing to another church saying, basically, like, look at how God was glorified in this. So Polycarp gets the word that he's going to be martyred, and he lived in the city, and it says that he was not disturbed and just wanted to stay in the city. But a lot of people were like, dude, you got to get out of the city. Like, they're going to come get you to kill you. And he was a known figure in the city. He was like well-known, respected, not just by people in the church, but like the community respected him. And we get this sense that like there was just like this day when basically like the mob wanted to kill him for the entertainment value. And so he doesn't want to leave, but then his friends convince him, and they say, you gotta go away. And so it says, he went out quietly to a farm, not distant from the city, and he stayed with a few friends, doing nothing but praying day and night for all and for the churches throughout the world, as was his custom. And while he was praying, he fell into a trance for 3 days, which he's super old. So like sometimes
he could have just been dead.
Yeah, they're like, it's just a really long. Old people don't sleep a lot, you know? And so, I mean, he's just kind of doing his thing.
Yeah.
But at one point he wakes up and he has he's having this vision where the pillow under his head is just on fire, and he turns to his friends and he says, I must be burnt alive. He's basically prophesying about how he's going to die. And so we just get this sense that he's just like this really peaceful guy and seems relatively unbothered at the prospect of being martyred. The other really cool thing that I see is that I think this is a huge encouragement for elderly people in our churches who sometimes may get a sense of like, I don't see how I fit into what's going on, or how I could be valuable. And we see Polycarp basically like flexing the full weight of his experience and his authority and his like having lived a long life with Jesus right here at this critical moment. It's so impactful. So like the soldiers show up to his house. They figure out he's at this farm, and they showed up, and he sets the table for them. He's like, oh, let's feed these guys while they're here. So like they go to feed the soldiers that show up, and then he prayed for them, and the people who came were, they literally like sit there and they repented that they had even come to like arrest him in the first place. But they eventually do, and they're on the way that like they're trying to convince him that, because really all they wanted, the city wanted him to basically just say Caesar is Lord. Sure. And he's like, not gonna do it. And they're like, no, we really don't. You get the sense they didn't actually really want to kill him, like the officials. But he just doesn't relent. So they take him to the arena where they're going, it's like a coliseum kind of, where they're going to kill him publicly. And the sound in the arena is so loud that you couldn't even like hear your own voice speaking. That's how like loudly these people are clamoring for his death. And so he has to stand like in the middle of this arena, and there's a proconsul who's like this judge who's gonna like basically give him one last chance to convert essentially away from Christianity, and then he's gonna condemn him to death. And he's so ice cold in this scenario with this judge. Like there's so many good one-liners. Like for example, the judge is like, hey, respect your age. I want you to, you're an old guy. We don't want to kill you.
Who wants to kill an old guy?
Right.
It just looks bad.
Yeah. Bad look, dude. And he tells him, just say away with the atheists, which is what Roman people referred to Christians as atheists, because they saw them as they didn't hold to this pantheon of gods, and so they're like, oh, they're just atheists, I guess. And so he says, just say away with the atheists. And Polycarp sits there and he looks around at all of the people like screaming for his death, and he just looks at them and he waves his hand and he goes, away with the atheists, in reference to the people around him. And the proconsul's like, okay, like that wasn't really what I was looking for. And then he says, just take the oath and I'll let you go. Revile Christ. And then this, what Polycarp says next, is probably the most famous thing that he ever said. It's actually my Facebook cover photo. Is a picture of Polycarp by the Our Church Speaks guy saying this. And he just said, for 86 years have I been his servant, and he has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king and my savior? And man, that's just, if that doesn't invigorate you, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
So they basically are like, okay, well, we're gonna have to kill you. And so they said, we're gonna kill you with the beasts. And he's like, okay, bet.
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, okay, well, we'll kill you with fire. We'll burn you. And he says to them, you threaten with the fire that burns for a time and is quickly quenched, but you don't know about the fire which awaits the wicked and the judgment to come and an everlasting punishment. But why are you waiting? Come, do what you will. And it's just so cool, dude. Like,
he was saying every sentence as if it would be the word they wrote on his like tombstone. Like, he's just dropping gems on gems, dude.
Yeah.
Like,
just incredible.
Yeah. I don't think I'll have that tact if I'm in his shoes, man. I think I'd try really hard and I'd be like, yeah, bring a bunch of lions. Cause there's a lion that I serve, and cause that lion, he's not going to eat me. The Lion of Judah is going to eat you. And then like they'd have released the lions as I was talking, and I'd just be getting ripped apart. I'd be like, because you see the lion, and then I'm just getting shredded apart by a bunch
Jesus
of
is the true and better. Yeah, it's incredible. I think it's a good example of what of the encouragement that Jesus gives to his disciples, where he's basically like, don't worry about what you're going to have to say when you go to stand before the authorities for following me. Like, the Spirit will give you the words to say. And I think that we're seeing this in action here.
Yeah.
So they say they're going to burn him, and they bring out they get ready to. It says that the crowd like rushed. They all of a sudden they bring out all this wood from everywhere. They make this pile of wood. They're going to burn him. And they were getting ready to nail him to a pole, basically, so that, anybody who's about to be burnt, like, if you had the option to like run away, like as you're like literally as you're being burnt, like your body's not going to allow you to stay there. And so they were going to nail him.
You get a little understandably squirmy.
Yeah. Wouldn't be very fun.
Sure.
And so they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna nail you to this pole so you won't run away. And he says, don't bother, because the person who gives me power to endure the fire will also grant me the power to remain in the flames unmoved, even without these nails.
I hate this guy. He just everything he says is so cool.
Oh man,
that's so freaking whatever.
86-year-old
had to make up for his stupid name. Yeah, Polycarp. Sorry. All right, continue.
Yeah, dude, he's a heater.
I'm getting mad. It's envy right now in my heart.
So they just tie him to the pole, and then they set him on fire. But then what happens next is it's considered to be apocryphal, meaning like a lot of people hear the story and they're like, okay, this is definitely where like his followers kind of kicked in and maybe embellished the story a little bit.
Yeah.
I actually, the older I get, lean towards thinking that there's not very much embellishment going on here, and this is a very unique time in church history where God is like working in a really powerful and I don't like the term supernatural, but a there's just this evident way that God is basically like putting his stamp of approval on what's going on. So
yeah,
they light him on fire, and it says that for everyone watching, it didn't look like he was. It didn't look like someone who was on fire, which I've never seen. I mean, I've seen like stuff on the internet of people catching on fire.
Ooh.
But I've never seen someone be executed by being burnt alive, and I can't imagine that that's ordinarily a very pleasant thing to see, watching someone's like skin melt off and them screaming, and like it would be pretty horrendous. The description of what happened was that none of that happened, but it was almost like they were watching. The words they used were bread being baked.
Yeah.
And he also didn't die. It was just like he was just being like refined. And so it said that they realized he wasn't dying, so they sent a soldier in to kill him. And so this guy takes a dagger and he stabs him. And it said that so much blood came out that it put out the whole fire. And it also said that a dove like came out of his body and flew away, which is kind of like, what do you do with that? Like that's definitely the weirdest part of the story. But whether or not that actually happened, I think that there's a true spiritual truth going on here, which is that like this was his final act of obedience as a Christian.
Yeah.
And that it was so evident to everyone there that what they had just done was martyring like a good man.
Yeah, that's a Tarantino level amount of blood though. Like that's a geyser of blood. Good gracious.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have a couple thoughts. Very few of them worth listening to. Firstly, I think the question that's on all of our minds right now is, dude's 86, martyrdom. Like, I don't know. It's not beating a dead horse, but it's beating an almost dead horse. Like, just like, I bet if you
wasn't very cash money of the Smyrnans. Like,
by no means. Like, I think if you want to kill an 86-year-old man, you just don't feed him his 4:00 dinner. Like, he'll be gone by 5:30, bro. Like, that's it. So seems a little excessive. That's thought number one. Thought number two, this is a whole nother episode. Maybe it's not even an episode, but the viewpoint that exists in some modern evangelical circles of like the world today, like modern culture is getting just progressively worse and worse and slipping into deeper forms of immorality. Anytime I hear a depiction of a Colosseum, I'm instantly like, I don't really buy that.
Wait, what do you mean?
Like, there are like this viewpoint that like the world, like the modern day Western culture is like as immoral as world history has ever been. And I'm like, there were thousands of people who were super psyched about an old man getting burned to death and possibly eaten by lions. Like, that was their like Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. I feel like humanity's come a long way. Like, that's enough to make me post-mill before I start thinking about actually being
You
post-mill.
heard it here, folks.
Yeah, I said might, but it won't because never more. Again, that's a different episode.
Yeah, it is a good reminder to look like ways that our culture has been thoroughly salted by the gospel, and that like we have our own cultural sins that we have a hard time seeing, that probably people from that day and age would look at us and go, wow, you guys are heinous. But there is a difference, and that's an important distinction. Like, part of the effect of the gospel in Western culture is that like that I don't think is seen as an acceptable practice. Let's just watch this old dude melt.
Yeah,
we're all gonna be super excited about it.
Yeah, this is the best. Yeah, that's pretty grotesque. But I love stories like that. Like, I mean, it kind of goes, it's what we discussed in the Desert Fathers episode, but I love stories that come across as so like fantastic in like the fantasy. Like, it's so like over the top and almost absurd. It's like, don't know if I even have any grounds to question if this happened. Like it actually kind of makes sense. Like even then, how would his disciples be like, oh, let's say he bled so much it put out the fire. Yeah, write that down. Like, it's so strange that I think you're right. I don't know if I really question it because...
Well, and they're writing about a super public event that thousands of people witnessed.
Yeah, any Joe Schmo could be like, that didn't happen. He just screamed and died.
Right. And the best parts of the story, in my opinion, aren't even like I think we see just as much evidence of the Spirit being at work in this, in just the absolute disrespectful things he's saying to the judge.
Yeah.
As we see like him baking like bread in the fire. Like those are both examples of the Spirit's work in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that the imagery of, because another thing that I read was that the smell of his burning, of his immolation, was not of burning flesh but actually of sweet incense. So it's like, yeah, you're watching this dude being burned to death, which I imagine is a traumatizing thing to experience, whether you're rah with the crowd or not. But then it's like, it's not grotesque. Like, it is in some ways like the smell of baking bread is incredible, but it's also like, that's what dough is supposed to do. Like, it's baking to become what it was meant to be. And I think like we are this is, I think, something I've been pressing in on my preaching quite a bit. We're such a suffering averse culture that I think that we still, I mean, and I'm guilty of this in my subconscious for sure, to say like, if I get to the point in my life where I am suffering, I start to think I must be doing something wrong because this isn't the path for me. If I'm suffering, it must mean I need to reroute and do something differently. But I think what the portrait that Scripture paints for us, and I think what is really beautifully portrayed in this experience, is that no, sometimes suffering is the refining that God is explicitly calling you into. Because martyrdom was like kind of celebrated back then. Like, there's an interesting relationship all throughout church history that Christians have with martyrdom, and during the early time period, like, it was a tremendous honor to be martyred. Like, it was obviously a bummer, but like, you know, this is where we're getting stories of saints who were like singing songs as they're marched to their execution. Like, they recognized that the trial that I'm about to go through, like, when I get to the other side of it, like, I won't just be a better person, I will actually be face to face with my Lord Jesus. And yeah, there's something interesting about that.
That seemed to be part of like, if you read this letter, it seems to be part of the goal that they had, was to help people think well about martyrdom, because it does tend to get, at certain times in church history, it seems like, you were telling me the other day about how, you know, there was people just actively provoking soldiers to try to get martyred because that's how like highly esteemed it was. But they right at the beginning of the letter, they say that he waited to be betrayed as the Lord had done. He said, so that we might become his imitators, meaning Polycarp's imitators. But it was like he was thinking of others other than himself. If he was just thinking about himself, he may have taken steps to kind of press the issue and get martyred sooner. But he didn't. He wasn't just agitating authorities just so that he would get in hot water. He just kind of kept doing his thing and obeying God until it kind of boiled over to the point that he was going to be martyred. And it seemed like they were trying to help people like be more thoughtful about that.
Yeah.
Like not rushing into that.
Yeah. And this is really one of the first, because I'm trying to think, like, a number of the early church fathers were martyred, but I think he was the first, because I don't think Justin Martyr was martyred before Polycarp, was he?
I don't know on the dates.
Yeah, I don't.
It does talk about, there was, I think before this, it says that there was, I think I read somewhere in here that there had been 12 people who had been martyred already in Smyrna, but they weren't ones that we would consider, you know, church fathers, but Yeah, I don't know about the dates as a part, if we're considering him in relation with other notable church fathers.
Right. Yeah, okay, so it's about 10-year difference between Polycarp and Justin Martyr. So yeah, he was martyred before before Justin was. So
what about, it might be Ignatius though. Hold on.
Okay.
Because Ignatius died in 140. So Ignatius actually may have been the first. And I think we're definitely gonna have to do an episode on Ignatius. I think it was Ignatius who said something like, was it him who said, I am the Lord's wheat?
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about?
I think it was.
I am the Lord's wheat, and I will be ground by the teeth of the beast, so that I might become the pure bread of Christ, or something.
Yeah,
like
which
that.
is pretty. That's a pretty hardcore thing to say.
Yeah,
that's pretty solid. So, dude, are you getting any feedback like static inside your headphones?
No, is that why you look really uncomfortable?
It is. All right, well, we'll cut this stuff out, but I need to.
I got no feedback.
Bother me.
You might want to go see a doctor about that. No, not everybody gets to hear it because you're reenacting it. Yeah, let me read, maybe to kind of wrap it up, let me read this quote just from the very end of the letter, which again, I highly encourage you to go read this. It's in the public domain. You can just Google the Martyrdom of Polycarp and find a version of it to read online. But it says this at the end. It says, by his endurance, he overcame the unrighteous ruler and thus gained the crown of immortality, and he is glorifying God and the Almighty Father, rejoicing with the apostles and all the righteous, and he is blessing our Lord Jesus Christ, the Savior of our souls and governor of our bodies, and the shepherd of the universal church throughout the world.
Yeah. So, yeah, what do you think, if you were an early Christian experiencing just maybe kind of coming and going persecution in this time, what does a letter like this do to you? How does it shift your perspective on martyrdom? And what does it do for you today as an American Christian with very little risk of martyrdom in your life?
Yeah. I think of how impactful it would be if my church got a letter from the church in Manhattan that said, brothers and sisters, we are sobered yet so excited to tell you about how our brother Tim Keller was lit on fire in Times Square last night.
Yeah.
Let us tell you about how it happened. And then a story like this unfolded. It would be so this mixture of emotions of just oh my gosh, they killed Tim Keller.
Yeah.
Or a local example for us, if we got a note that our beloved friend Rod had been crucified, we would be oh no, we would be so sad, but at the same time as we're reading this, we would be so enriched to go, oh wow, he played the man until the end.
Yeah.
He withstood this final just onslaught from Satan and is now with Christ. I don't think we can even quantify how enriching that would be for us, and it does say something for the power of martyrdom, and we see that happening in other parts of our world right now.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it, because if I heard that Tim Keller had been burned at the stake, or that our friend Rod had been crucified, just putting myself in that brief thought experiment, I'm not thinking, oh, that's great. What a beautiful testimony to the love of Christ and to the suffering that we're sometimes called into. My immediate thought is, I'm outraged. This is absurd. There needs to be justice. This was a breach of how our society should be run. This is completely unacceptable. And I'm thinking, how do I get justice? This is completely absurd. There's an outrage that stirs up in me. But the posture of this letter was this happened and it's awful, but Polycarp was enriched by it, and the people who were witnessing it, even those who wanted to dance on his ashes, were literally fed a beautiful testimony of Christ. And like, it'd be one thing if the letter was like, sharpen your pitchforks, get ready for a riot because we're gonna burn this city down because of what they did to our bishop. Instead, it's just like, this is what happened. And although it was a tragedy, like the crucifixion of Christ was a tragedy, and yet we can see the triumph, and we can praise God for it. And like, that is such an incredible like paradigm shift. Like, that is a completely, this is the upside down kingdom. Like, we rejoice in the face of death, and we are still eager and filled with contentment even in the face of injustice, because we know of a God who is making good all that man intends for evil. It's literally in the first book of our Bible, that concept. And I mean, it pacifism as a concept against like Christian military involvement, I think can be seen as a little bit too much of an extension of this thought. But it's like the idea that Christians could be content at such an early time in their history with the violence inflicted on them. I think it's what's preserved us as a faith. Like, there's the famous saying, I still don't know who wrote it, but the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Like, the church does not exist without the bloodshed of the first men who stood against the pagans and the secular folk, even to the point of death, even when they were a very oppressed minority. Like, they were doing so in the name of Christ, not maliciously, not violently, not militantly, but they were doing so humbly. And even in their literal like slaughter, like, it was something that Christ was using to bring his church to life. And I think that's an encouraging word for our our brothers and sisters who are still facing stuff like this across in different places throughout the world. It's like, I think that to be able to, once you see a martyr as a victory, there's something invulnerable about the Christian faith. Like, I remember reading a quote, I think it was Marcus Aurelius, and he was a Roman emperor, and he was writing, and he was talking about how much he hated the Christians. And he said, I hate the Christians because you can't threaten them. Like, there's nothing you can take from them, because if you can take a Christian and publicly and slowly torture them to death, and their friends are celebrating and they see it as a victory, like, what can you coerce them to do? Like, they will never see you as Lord because they see their Lord as the King of all kings. And there's something like you can't touch about that kind of thing. And of course, that can lead to all types of issues, but in this context, it's like, holy smokes, like, these Christians really were given an impenetrable force field because they knew just how much they really couldn't be touched by swords or lions.
It shows just how totally Jesus like suplexed death. Yeah. That within one generation, you've got people who are just utterly unbothered by the concept of it, and you see it's almost as if like Satan can't figure it out. He's happily killed every single person that's ever lived up until Jesus dies, raises to life, changes the meaning of death for everyone for all time, and within one generation it's like Satan's still trying to throw that like, I'll kill you, and Christians are just like, thanks. Yeah. Like, it's just totally changed. And I think a helpful way, something that we should probably glean from Polycarp's death, is that your death can be a martyrdom, not in the sense of like there's people who are killing you for your faith, but the core of what martyrdom is faithful witness. Your death can be and should be a faithful witness today, no matter what the circumstances are. Your death is it's your final act of obedience to God, and it's the final opportunity that you have to say to the watching world, death, where is your sting? Where is your victory? I belong to Christ. And that actually takes premeditation. Like you may be like in a fit of fervor, like get this boldness on your deathbed, but you should also like prepare for this. I think that you should be finding ways to remind yourself of your death, and that there is going to be a day in which you are called to be, saying your final piece with the world. It's that memento mori idea, right? Remember your death. This idea that, like we live, this is something that not just Christians, but as sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, like this is the curse that we still live under. This is the most tangible fruits of the already but underlined not yet that we experience. Like everyone on earth today will die. Like unless the Lord comes back or some other type of supernatural narrative unfolds around us, like death has awaited every person living in the ground or in ash or dust floating in our skies. Like death is there for everyone. And we often, I feel like what turns me off about sometimes the memento mori approach is we only use it evangelistically. We're harassing non-believers and saying, hey, you're gonna die, do you know where you're gonna go? But then that concept is nowhere in the church. Like where are we reminding like the Christian, hey, like you are going to die. Like you're putting a lot of effort in putting that in stocking up that portfolio, homeboy, which is great, but remember, you're gonna die, and so are your kids who are gonna leave all your stuff to. So like this is not to fall into the Platonist trap of just got to get my body off the earth. Yeah. Like we're gonna dissolve into the spiritual realm. It's not that, but it is kind of it's not saying, oh, forget the bodily things and live for the spiritual stuff, because that's just a terrible dichotomy. Like they're so intertwined. But it is like, your death is coming. Like prepare yourself for it, or at least live within that reality. Don't become so enmeshed in the current worldly life that we're living that death comes to us like a shock, because we have to recognize the Western narrative is terribly afraid of death. Like we're doing everything we can to not die. Other cultures have introduced and allowed for death to have a proper place in its narrative. I don't think the Western culture is there. I don't think the Western culture really knows what to do with death. That's why when somebody dies, we ship that body away to a house and we do one last viewing once it's been coated with makeup and stuffed with chemicals, and then we dig it in the ground, and then we drink some punch, and we share some jokes, and then we move on. And then when you're still grieving a week later and you have to go to counseling, you're like, what's wrong with me? It's because you have no place for death in your culture. Anyways, who that makes me think of? Palmer. Yeah. Who, Lord willing, faithful listeners, will be the next voice that you hear on our podcast. We're very excited. He's a dear friend of ours, and we'll give him a more proper introduction next week. But yeah, I think we should close there. Big guy. Good, what do you think? Yep. Well, friends, this has been Church History for Chumps. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, or just leave us a review wherever podcasts can be found, because that would help us be found by more people. All right. Thanks, guys. See you later.